Let me tell you a story that will chill your bones and warm your heart at the same time. This is a tale about greed, betrayal, and the fierce courage of a woman who refused to stay buried. Her name was Isabella, and she was beautiful, kind, and wealthy beyond measure. She had inherited a fortune from her late father, a successful businessman who built his empire from nothing. Isabella used her wealth wisely, helping the poor and supporting those in need. But her husband, James, saw only dollar signs. He was handsome and charming on the outside, but his heart was black as coal. While Isabella slept peacefully each night, James lay awake planning her death. He wanted her money, her properties, her investments, everything. And he was willing to do the unthinkable to get it. The village trusted James. They saw him as a devoted husband, always smiling, always attentive. But behind closed doors, evil lived. This is the story of how Isabella rose from the grave to destroy the man who tried to bury her alive. It started on a cold October evening. Isabella had just returned from the city where she managed her father's old business. She was tired but happy, carrying gifts for the house staff and treats for the neighborhood children. James greeted her at the door with a kiss that tasted like lies. "Welcome home, my love," he said, taking her coat. Isabella smiled, trusting him completely. That night, James prepared dinner himself, something he rarely did. He poured her a glass of red wine and watched as she drank it. Within minutes, Isabella felt dizzy. Her vision blurred. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt heavy. "James, I don't feel well," she whispered, reaching for him. He smiled coldly. "I know." Those were the last words she heard before darkness swallowed her whole. When Isabella woke, she couldn't move. Her body felt like stone. She could hear sounds, muffled voices, but she couldn't open her eyes or scream. Terror gripped her heart as she realized what was happening. James had poisoned her. Isabella's mind screamed, but her body betrayed her. She was trapped inside herself, fully conscious but completely paralyzed. She heard James on the phone, his voice calm and rehearsed. "Yes," she collapsed suddenly. "I think it was her heart. Please come quickly." Lies. All lies. Hours passed like years. She felt hands lifting her, placing her on something soft. A stretcher, perhaps. She heard weeping, fake weeping from James. "My beautiful wife, gone so suddenly," he sobbed for the gathered crowd. Inside, Isabella raged. The doctor pronounced her dead. She wanted to scream, "I'm alive! I'm still here!" But nothing moved. They prepared her body, dressed her in white, placed her in a wooden coffin. She felt every touch, every movement. The horror was unspeakable. At the funeral, she heard James crying theatrically. She heard her friends mourning. And then, the worst sound of all, dirt hitting wood. They were burying her alive. Panic flooded every cell of her paralyzed body as darkness closed in completely. Buried 6 feet under, Isabella floated between consciousness and madness. The drug James used was meant to mimic death perfectly, slowing her heartbeat and breathing to nearly nothing. But it was temporary. Slowly, painfully, sensation began returning to her fingers. She could wiggle them slightly. Hope, desperate and fierce, bloomed in her chest. She had perhaps an hour before the air ran out. With trembling fingers, she felt around the coffin's interior. Her father had insisted on quality, even for final rest. The coffin had an inner lining she could tear. Beneath it, wood. Using a ring on her finger, she scratched and scraped. Her nails broke and bled, but she didn't stop. She found a weak spot where 2 boards joined. Pushing with all her returning strength, she felt it give slightly. Dirt began trickling in. She nearly panicked, but forced herself to stay calm. More pushing. More dirt. Then, suddenly, her hand broke through into loose soil. She dug like a creature possessed, pulling earth into the coffin, pushing upward. The climb through 6 feet of dirt should have killed her. Perhaps she died and came back. Perhaps rage kept her alive. Either way, Isabella clawed her way up through the earth like a seed seeking sunlight. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. Dirt filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. But she kept moving upward, always upward. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, her hand broke through into night air. She pulled herself out of her own grave, gasping and choking, covered in soil and blood. Rain poured from the sky, washing some of the dirt from her face. She collapsed beside her grave, shaking violently, vomiting soil and terror. For several minutes, she simply lay there, feeling rain on her skin, breathing air into her damaged lungs. She was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Then anger came, hot and pure. James had tried to murder her. James, who had whispered, "I love you," 1,000 times, had buried her alive for money. She stood on shaking legs, looked at her open grave, and whispered into the storm, "You should have made sure I was dead." Isabella stumbled through the rain-soaked graveyard, her white burial dress clinging to her like a ghost's shroud. She couldn't go home. James would finish what he started. She couldn't go to the police looking like this. They'd think she was insane. She needed shelter, time, and a plan. On the edge of town lived Margaret, her father's old housekeeper, retired now but fiercely loyal. Isabella made her way there, staying in shadows, avoiding streetlights. When she knocked on Margaret's door, the old woman nearly fainted. "Sweet, merciful God," Margaret gasped, pulling Isabella inside quickly. "Child, they buried you today. I was there. I saw." "The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Isabella said, then laughed a broken, slightly hysterical laugh. Margaret drew a bath, burned the burial dress, and wrapped Isabella in warm blankets. Over hot tea, Isabella told everything. Margaret's face grew hard as stone. "That devil," she hissed. "That smiling devil." "I need your help," Isabella said. "I need to stay hidden while I gather proof. Then I'm going to destroy him." Margaret nodded firmly. "You'll stay here as long as needed. And child, I know things about your husband. Things your father discovered before he died." For 3 days, Isabella slept, recovering from her ordeal. Her body was bruised and battered, her hands wrapped in bandages. But her mind grew sharper with each passing hour. Margaret shared what she knew. James had been fired from his previous job for embezzlement. Isabella's father had discovered this after the wedding but said nothing, hoping James would change. He hadn't. Margaret also revealed something chilling. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack," she said quietly. "He suspected poison but couldn't prove it. He was about to cut James from his will." Isabella's blood ran cold. "James killed my father too?" "I believe so. Your father started feeling sick right after James moved in." Rage and grief warred in Isabella's heart. James hadn't just tried to kill her. He'd likely murdered her father. Now everything made sense. James's insistence on managing her finances, his pressure to update her will, his fake devotion. On the 4th day, Isabella dyed her hair dark brown, wore glasses, and dressed plainly. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "Perfect. Now," she told Margaret, "we begin." Isabella's first stop was the office of Detective Sarah Mills, a woman her father had once helped when she was falsely accused of corruption. Sarah listened to Isabella's story with growing horror and anger. "James reported you dead from a heart condition," Sarah said, showing Isabella the death certificate. "He seemed genuinely devastated." "He's a talented actor," Isabella replied bitterly. "But I need to do this carefully," Sarah warned. "If we move too fast, he'll destroy evidence or run. We need to catch him in the act of something big. Then we give him rope to hang himself," Isabella said. "Let him think he's won. Let him get comfortable. Then we strike." Sarah nodded. "I'll start a quiet investigation. Meanwhile, you need to stay dead. If he knows you're alive, he becomes dangerous." Isabella agreed. Over the next week, she watched James from a distance. He played the grieving widower perfectly, attending a memorial service with tears streaming down his face. But she also noticed something else, a woman. Young, beautiful, always nearby. Sarah identified her as Vanessa Moore, a woman James had been seeing for over a year. Isabella's jaw tightened. Of course there was another woman. Isabella began gathering allies. She contacted Martin, her father's old business partner who James had pushed out of the company. Martin was shocked to see her alive and eager to help. "James has been embezzling from the company," Martin revealed. "I suspected it but couldn't prove it without access to the books." "Get me inside," Isabella said. "I'll get you proof." Next, she visited Rosa. The housekeeper James had fired immediately after the funeral, claiming he needed to cut costs despite Isabella's massive wealth. Rosa wept when she saw Isabella alive. "That man is evil, Miss Isabella. Pure evil. He had me thrown out without references, without my final pay. 20 years I worked for your family." Isabella took Rosa's hands. "Help me take him down, and I'll make sure you're compensated for everything." One by one, Isabella assembled her team: the wronged, the betrayed, the forgotten. Each person James had stepped on became a weapon in Isabella's careful plan. And the best part? James had no idea the ghost he'd created was coming for him. Isabella discovered James had already begun liquidating her assets. Properties were being sold quietly. Bank accounts were being emptied. He was preparing to disappear with Vanessa and every penny of Isabella's inheritance. "He's planning to leave the country," Detective Mills confirmed. "I traced him buying plane tickets to a non-extradition country." "How long do we have?" Isabella asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Time was running out. Isabella needed to move faster. She broke into her own house one night while James was out with Vanessa. The place looked different already, colder. Her photos had been removed. It was like she'd never existed. In James's study, she found his laptop. Margaret's grandson, a computer expert, had given her a device that could copy everything. She plugged it in and waited, heart pounding. Footsteps. James was home early. Isabella barely had time to grab the device and hide in the closet before James entered the study. Through the crack, she watched him pour whiskey and make a phone call. "Yes, everything's going according to plan," he said, laughing. "That stupid woman never suspected a thing. By next month, we'll be in paradise." Isabella's hands shook with rage as she listened. James continued talking, revealing details that made her stomach turn. He'd been planning her death for over 2 years. Every kindness, every "I love you," every gentle touch had been a calculated lie. He'd researched the drug carefully, practiced the dose, even rehearsed his grieving husband performance. "The best part," James said into the phone, "is that everyone believes I'm heartbroken. They're actually feeling sorry for me." And Isabella was so trusting, so naive. She never checked the finances, never questioned anything. She made it almost too easy. Vanessa's voice came through the phone, tinny but audible. "I can't wait to spend all that money, baby. We're going to live like royalty." They both laughed. Isabella waited until James left the room before slipping out through the window. She'd gotten what she needed, his laptop data and a recorded confession. But more than that, she'd gotten fuel for her rage. Back at Margaret's house, she reviewed the laptop contents with her team. The evidence was damning: fake invoices, hidden accounts, forged signatures. James had been stealing for years. Isabella's next move was brilliant and risky. She sent anonymous letters to James's other victims, people he'd scammed in business deals before marrying her. Each letter contained partial evidence of his crimes and a phone number. Soon, a dozen people had contacted her, all eager to see James pay. Among them was David, a man James had cheated out of his family business. "I lost everything because of him," David said bitterly. "My wife left me. I almost killed myself. Help me make this right," Isabella said. They formed a secret alliance, sharing information and resources. Isabella discovered James had been doing this for years, moving from place to place, marrying wealthy women, stealing their money. She was just his latest victim. Except she wasn't playing the role he'd written for her. One of James's former partners revealed something crucial. James had a storage unit where he kept fake documents and disguises. Isabella and Detective Mills raided it one night, finding evidence of at least 3 other dead wives. "He's a serial killer," Mills whispered, horrified. Isabella's blood ran cold. She could have been wife number 4, forgotten and unmourned. Now, she had more than enough evidence. But she wanted James to feel what she'd felt: powerless, betrayed, buried alive by his own choices. Isabella decided it was time to make James paranoid. She started leaving small signs that someone was watching. His car would be parked slightly differently than he'd left it. Items in his house would be moved subtly. Photos would appear where they shouldn't be. At first, James dismissed these things. But as they continued, his confidence began to crack. Isabella watched from a distance as he became jumpy, looking over his shoulder constantly. One night, she left a single white rose on Isabella's grave, the kind she'd loved. When James visited the cemetery the next day as part of his grieving husband act, he saw it and turned pale. "Who put this here?" he demanded of the groundskeeper. The old man shrugged. "Wasn't here yesterday. Maybe someone who knew her." James began drinking more. Vanessa noticed his change in behavior. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped during one of their meetings that Isabella had bugged. "You're acting crazy." "Something's not right," James muttered. "I keep feeling like someone's watching me." "You're paranoid. Nobody suspects anything. Let's just get the money and leave." But James's confidence was crumbling. Good. Isabella wanted him afraid. 2 weeks before James's planned escape, Isabella made her boldest move. She attended a charity gala that James was hosting in memory of his late wife. Disguised with her dark hair, glasses, and an elegant but simple dress, she looked nothing like the Isabella everyone had known. She bid on items, danced with strangers, and got close enough to James to watch him perform his grief. He gave a speech that made people cry. "My beloved Isabella was the light of my life," he said, voice breaking perfectly. "Every day without her is agony. But I'm setting up this foundation in her name to help others, because that's what she would have wanted." The crowd applauded. Isabella felt sick. But then she did something unexpected. During the networking portion, she approached James. "Mr. Crawford, my condolences for your loss," she said in a slightly altered voice. "Your wife sounded like an amazing woman." James smiled his charming smile. "She was the best. It must be difficult managing her estate alone. All that wealth, all those decisions." Something flickered in James's eyes. "I manage." "I'm sure you do. Though I heard rumors about some financial irregularities." Isabella let the words hang. James's smile froze. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, nothing specific," Isabella said smoothly. "Just gossip, you know how people talk. Someone mentioned offshore accounts, questionable transactions. But I'm sure it's all perfectly legal." She watched color drain from James's face. "Who are you?" "Nobody important. Just someone interested in justice." She walked away, leaving James staring after her, panicked. That night, James frantically called his lawyer, his accountant, anyone who might have talked. Isabella had planted the seed of paranoia, and it was growing fast. The next day, James tried to move up his escape timeline. He called Vanessa. "We need to leave sooner. This week." "What? Why?" "The plan was next month. Things are getting complicated. Just pack your things." But moving sooner meant making mistakes. James became sloppy, desperate. He transferred large sums of money hastily, leaving obvious trails. Detective Mills watched it all, documenting everything. "He's panicking," Mills told Isabella. "Good. Panicked people make mistakes." Isabella smiled grimly. "He's about to make his biggest mistake of all. He's going to think he can run. And that's when we close the trap." Isabella's final preparation was gathering everyone in one place. She rented a large conference room in a hotel downtown, sending anonymous invitations to James's victims, business partners, and the key people who could testify against him. Detective Mills arranged for financial crimes investigators to be present. The media was tipped off about a major announcement regarding the late Isabella Crawford. James, hearing about the meeting, assumed it was about dissolving Isabella's estate. He brought his lawyer, confident this was just formality. When he walked into the room, he expected maybe a dozen people. Instead, he found over 50 people waiting, all staring at him with expressions ranging from anger to disgust. "What is this?" James demanded. "An intervention?" "In a way," said a voice he recognized. A voice he'd heard beg for mercy before poisoning her. A voice that should have been silenced forever. Isabella stepped out from behind a screen, very much alive, very much in control. James's face went white as snow. His legs nearly gave out. "Impossible," he whispered. "You're dead. I watched them bury you." "You watched them bury me alive," Isabella corrected, her voice steel. "There's a difference." The room erupted. People shouted. Cameras flashed. James stood frozen, his mind unable to process what his eyes saw. "Isabella," he stammered. "But how? The poison should have—" He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. "Should have killed me," Isabella finished. "Yes, it should have. You used a paralytic drug that mimicked death. You buried me alive, James. While I was fully conscious, fully aware. I heard every lie you told, every fake tear you shed." James's lawyer stood up. "This is insane. My client is clearly in shock from seeing his dead wife." "I was never dead," Isabella said calmly. "Detective Mills, please show everyone the evidence." For the next hour, Detective Mills presented everything. Financial records showing embezzlement, forged documents, evidence of James's other wives, recorded conversations between James and Vanessa, and the smoking gun, James's own laptop data showing his detailed plan to murder Isabella. James kept shaking his head. "This is a trick. She's trying to frame me." "With what motive?" Isabella asked coldly. "I'm already supposed to be dead. I have nothing to gain except justice." One by one, James's victims stood and testified. The business partner he'd ruined, the previous employer he'd stolen from, Rosa the fired housekeeper. The evidence was overwhelming. Vanessa was brought in by police officers. When she saw Isabella alive, she screamed. "You told me she was dead. You said it was natural causes." "And you believed him?" Isabella asked. "Knowing he was married, knowing he was spending his dead wife's money on you?" Vanessa broke down. "He said you died of a heart condition. He said he'd waited until after your death to move on with me. He said the money was his inheritance." "Lies," Isabella said. "All lies. He murdered me, or tried to. Just like he likely murdered my father." Detective Mills stepped forward. "James Crawford, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. We're also investigating you for the suspected murder of Isabella's father and 3 other women." James finally reacted. He lunged toward the door, trying to run. But Detective Mills had anticipated this. Officers blocked every exit. They tackled James to the ground as he fought and screamed. "This isn't over," James shouted as they handcuffed him. "You can't prove everything. My lawyers will destroy you." Isabella walked over and knelt beside him. "You buried me alive, James. You left me in the dark, suffocating, terrified. Now you'll spend the rest of your life in a cage. How does that feel?" The trial became national news. "Woman returns from the grave to convict her killer husband," read the headlines. Isabella testified for 3 days, describing in vivid, horrifying detail what it felt like to be buried alive. The jury sat transfixed, many wiping tears. She explained how she'd clawed through dirt, how her nails had torn off, how she'd nearly suffocated. The prosecutor showed photos of her hands, still scarred. James's defense tried to claim Isabella had faked the entire thing for attention. But the medical evidence proved otherwise. The drug in her system, the trauma to her body, the dirt in her lungs. Then came the parade of James's other victims. The business partner who'd lost everything. The 3 families of women who had mysteriously died, while married to James under different names. The forensics expert who'd exhumed those bodies and found traces of the same drug. James sat at the defense table, his charming mask completely gone. He looked like what he was, a monster. Vanessa testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She revealed how James had bragged about his plan, how he'd laughed about Isabella's trust. "He called her the perfect mark," Vanessa said, crying. "He said she was so in love she'd never suspect anything." The defense's case collapsed within days. James's own lawyer seemed disgusted with him. They tried to plead temporary insanity, but the evidence showed years of calculated planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of madness. This was cold, premeditated murder, attempted 4 times successfully, once unsuccessfully. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. James showed no emotion. He simply stared ahead, blank and defeated. At sentencing, the judge looked at James with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Crawford, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen such calculated evil. You married women specifically to murder them for money. You destroyed families, ruined lives, and showed absolutely no remorse." She paused. "The prosecution is seeking the death penalty. However, I'm going to give you something worse. I'm sentencing you to life in prison without possibility of parole. You will spend every remaining day of your life in a cage, powerless and forgotten, just as you left your victims. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." James was led away in chains. As he passed Isabella, he whispered, "I should have made sure you were dead." Isabella smiled coldly. "Yes, you should have." After the trial, Isabella focused on rebuilding. The media attention was overwhelming at first, but she used it strategically. She established the Isabella Crawford Foundation for victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. "No one should suffer as I did," she told reporters. "And no one should have to fight their way back alone." The foundation provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and safe housing. Within a year, it had helped hundreds of women escape dangerous situations. Isabella also personally reached out to the families of James's other victims, providing financial support and helping them get closure. She tracked down the 3 women James had successfully murdered, all buried under false names in unmarked graves. She had them properly buried with full honors, ensuring their families knew the truth. Martin, her father's old partner, returned to help run the family business. Together, they rebuilt what James had tried to destroy. Rosa came back as head housekeeper, with a generous salary and full benefits. Each person James had wronged, Isabella made whole. But the process wasn't easy. Isabella suffered nightmares, sometimes waking up screaming, feeling dirt in her mouth. Therapy helped, but the trauma lingered. "I'm alive," she told her therapist, "but part of me is still in that grave." 1 year after the trial, Isabella visited the cemetery on the anniversary of the day she was buried. She stood at her own grave, now properly filled and marked with a stone that read, "Here lies nothing. Isabella Crawford survived." She laid white roses, the same kind James had seen mysteriously appearing. Then she visited her father's grave nearby. "I got him, Papa," she said softly. "I got justice for both of us. James will never hurt anyone again." She felt peace, perhaps for the first time since her ordeal. Margaret joined her, bringing flowers. The old woman had become Isabella's rock, her surrogate mother. "Your father would be so proud," Margaret said. "Not just for stopping James, but for how you've helped others." "I had good teachers," Isabella replied. "Papa taught me to be strong. You taught me to be smart. James taught me to never trust appearances." They walked through the cemetery together, 2 women who'd survived their own battles. "Do you ever regret not letting him die quickly?" Margaret asked. "Giving him life in prison instead of execution?" Isabella considered. "No. Death would have been mercy. This way, he lives every day knowing he lost. Knowing I beat him. That's better revenge." "Is it revenge or justice?" "Maybe both. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes." Isabella rebuilt her life with intention. She sold the house she'd shared with James. It held too many dark memories. She bought a new place by the ocean, filled with light and windows. She adopted 2 rescue dogs who'd been abandoned and abused, giving them the safe home they deserved. She also started dating again, carefully this time. She met Thomas, a teacher who knew her story but saw her as more than a victim. He was patient, kind, and most importantly, he respected her boundaries. "I'm not looking to be saved," Isabella told him early on. "I already saved myself." "I know," Thomas said. "I'm just looking to share coffee and maybe hold your hand sometimes, if that's okay." It was okay. Slowly, Isabella learned to trust again. She learned that James's evil didn't define all men, didn't define all relationships. She learned that love didn't have to be a trap. Her sisters-in-law from James's previous victims reached out, and they formed an unexpected bond. They called themselves the Survivors Club, meeting monthly to support each other. These women understood what Isabella had been through in ways others couldn't. Together, they healed. They also became advocates, speaking at domestic violence conferences, pushing for better laws, helping police identify patterns of financial abuse. They turned their pain into purpose. 5 years after her resurrection, Isabella stood before a packed auditorium. She was the keynote speaker at a national conference on domestic violence. Her speech was titled, "Rising from the Grave, A Survivor's Journey." She began with silence, letting the crowd settle. Then she spoke, her voice clear and strong. "5 years ago, my husband tried to murder me. He drugged me, buried me alive, and tried to steal everything my father had built. He almost succeeded." She paused. "Almost. But I'm standing here today because I refused to stay dead. I refused to let evil win. And I'm here to tell every person listening, you don't have to stay buried either." The crowd erupted in applause. Isabella shared her story, the horror and the triumph. She talked about the importance of financial independence, of trusting your instincts, of knowing warning signs. If someone tries to control your money, isolate you from friends, or makes you feel crazy for questioning them, those are red flags, she said. Trust your gut. It's trying to save your life. She ended with a powerful message. Survival is only the first step. The second step is thriving. The third is helping others. Don't just survive. Transform your pain into power. That's how we win. Years passed. Isabella's foundation became one of the most respected organizations fighting domestic violence in the country. She helped thousands of women escape, rebuild, and thrive. She married Thomas in a small ceremony by the ocean. It was simple, honest, and full of joy. No expensive displays, no pretense, just love. James remained in prison, exactly where he belonged. Isabella never visited him, never thought about him unless necessary. He'd taken enough of her life. She wouldn't give him another moment. On the 10th anniversary of her burial and resurrection, Isabella returned to the cemetery one final time. She looked at her grave marker and smiled. "Here lies nothing," she read aloud. "Because I'm still here, still fighting, still winning." She walked away from the grave without looking back. Behind her, the sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across the graveyard. It looked less frightening in the daylight, less like a place of death and more like what it was, a place of endings and beginnings. Isabella had ended one life and begun another. And this time, she was writing her own story. The end.